Hello, everyone. Please excuse the mess in the background. I'm in the business of a very short move here in Ohio, and so we're boxing up my study and I'm moving to a new home. I just finished grading your MilePost Three assignments, and I'm playing catch up on grading our discussions from last week. Everyone's doing excellent work. Here are a few points I wanted to share with you to keep us on target. Many of these issues emerged from your work, and I wanted to discuss these with you as we move forward. First, sociology is not an extension of psychology. Okay? Many of you have shared your thoughts about essentially psychological issues, but these need to be placed in a social context. So switch gears to thinking that way. It's very difficult to do. We live in what is called an over-psychologized world, or culture. Here are a couple of examples. Fight Club. From Fight Club, Taylor Durden is the protagonist, and indeed, this is a bit of a psychological thriller. But to analyze alienation is not to analyze their maybe queer theory text here, or how these individuals are lost, or how they feel disconnected. They're not separate and distinct characteristics, and you can't stop there. These psychological characteristics are important, but they are not, and I want to emphasize this here, endpoints. We do not discuss alienation in full treatment here in this class as much as I would like to, but there are two versions I'd like to share with you, and they're related to one another. First, you've talked about the Marxist version we already went over. Workers, in this case, financial sector workers for this movie, are removed from a sense of agency that would make their work meaningful. This element of Marxist alienation was expanded on by another social theorist, Max Weber, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. He held that capitalist organizations had morphed into bureaucratic machines, where workers were but cogs in a system that did not have their best interest in mind. If you want to see a comedic take on this from roughly the same era, you can watch, I would recommend you watch Office Space. It has many of the same themes, oddly, that Fight Club does. Now, the response in Fight Club is an effect or a dependent variable in terms of social methodology of this alienation, and it plays out in many ways. Violence, alternative sexualities, and ultimately the destruction of property when these financial centers are blown up by the very people who work in them. For those of you who are doing your take on Boys in the Hood, we need to keep a similar mechanism in mind. Yes, these youth live in violence-ridden, often fatherless homes, but fatherlessness is in and of itself not the cause of the problems. Okay? It's an effect of class divisions constructed squarely along racial lines in the United States. Institutional racism engenders a system where there is unequal access to resources between the dominant white and African American communities. Sorry for the dogs barking in the background. I live in a canine-centric neighborhood. What does unequal access to resources look like? Economic dissolution, that is systematic institutional discrimination or racism, that creates a system whereby people need to resort to alternative means to achieve basic financial needs, creates a deviant subculture, hence the violence. The system, as it is often called for shorthand, also called the justice system, systematically targets and arrests men of color and incarcerates them, often for nonviolent crimes, in disproportionate numbers when compared to whites. Hence the lack of cohesive traditional nuclear families. This is another form of institutional racism. In A Clockwork Orange, the completely reprehensible character of Alex, who commits sociopathic acts of brutal violence, is a central figure. But the psychology of this, not that many people are deviant or as deviant as psychopaths, is only a vehicle for a larger question. How do we treat the most reprehensible members of society? Reform, social control, brainwashing, execution? So in each of these films, the narrators are setting up a cause and effect relationship. In effect, they are depicting the consequences of different forms of disproportionately unequal access to resources through social arrangements. Think of social processes as the independent variable and those often dystopian, disastrous incomes as a dependent variable in your thinking about your film.